Hey, welcome to Awakenings Within.
Are you welcoming me? I get a welcome?
We're getting welcomed.
Well,
Who's
that's
joined
good.
us? Yeah, we have a special guest tonight. Should we just add him in right now?
Well, that's fine with me. You can
Let's
always
just
add
add him
him
in.
You can
He
add
can
him
be a
in.
surprise. Surprise!
No,
There he is.
I was actually thinking about Mike's and my relationship today because you get on the show and my brain starts going. But it's kind of bizarre because there's not many friendships like this. But I think I first met you when you were 18, right, or 19, something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
So we've actually known each other for nearly 4 decades.
Right.
Wow.
And I don't want to get emotional about this, but that's really special. There's very few relationships that last that long. But what's even more amazing is we've watched each other sometimes very closely, sometimes in different roles, sometimes in distance, go from being really boys to men.
Boys to men.
Yeah, we've gone from being single boy. Well, I was married when I met him, but basically single boys to grandfathers. I mean, that's really rather epic when you think about that.
You guys are old.
Some serious history here.
It sounds like we should start our own boy band or something like Men to Grandpas.
Wow, the grandpas.
The grandpas.
They had the mamas and the papas. They didn't have the grandmas and the grandpas.
Exactly.
You guys could do that.
So part of the reason and my excitement about having Mike on, obviously, so when you put it into that context, 4 decades, going from single guys by and large to grandparents, in there are these, as from the biblical worldview, glorious victories and humiliating defeats. Right? There's these epic swings because what is it? It's a journey, right? In other words, it's a long journey. So I know for guys like Mike, when young guys come up and they get all excited because they're going to meet Mike Jones, CEO of this multi-million-dollar landscaping company, and it's like, oh, you're so lucky. You know what I mean? It's just, and they have no clue. Like absolutely zero context of the blood and the guts and the sacrifice and the battles and the pain and the agony and everything that it takes to get you to this point. So one of the reasons I get excited about having guys like Mike on the show is because I like to explore the journey, right? Because I think in the journey is where the lessons are.
Yeah. So you have some audience members there, Mike, that you know her.
Oh. Who is that?
Who is that?
Queen Nefertiti.
And Tammy and Tina and Desma, and you have quite a few. Hi, welcome, you guys.
Yeah.
So I'm excited. So he was 18.
Yeah, you were in college.
Yeah.
If I remember at Liberty.
And what was the beginnings of that relationship? What was the foundation of it?
Well, at that point, I was the mentor and he was the mentee.
Yeah.
By the fact that I was in my mid-20s and so mature, you know what I mean? That I had planted a church with a friend of mine, and he was one of the young guys. It's laughable now at our age because we're so good friends, and age just is like not even in our, in our worldview. But at the time, I was like,
So you were building a church. So what was your role, Michael?
I was a college kid.
You're just a college kid.
What
did they make you do? Like
I was in charge of the parking of the parking lot.
Okay.
So I had to make sure. Well, it was a huge deal because we had to have all these satellite parking lots. I would have 10 people out there that I had to manage.
Oh.
So that was the birthplace of Mike's management skills. His administrative capacity to move traffic. Because we somebody who bought this building bought one. We won't name any names here. Bought a building with a parking lot far too small the amount of people that could attend the church. So parking was a major logistical problem, and Mike was one of the guys to solve that problem.
Great. So
But one of my question, this is what I would love for you to address. Looking back at the 18-year-old Mike Jones, did you have any inkling that you would be where you are now, that you'd even be a business guy? I mean, how is your current situation different from your expectations as an 18-year-old? Because they're always shift. So I'm curious, just your perspective on that.
Well, I started out in my entire life thinking I would be in the NFL. And I had my backup plan was to either be a pastor or to be a lawyer. So turned out I was not fast enough for one position and not big enough for another. And became very clear. And I literally had no idea what I would be good at in anything other than sports. So I was shocked that I had any skills to offer the world in that arena in my first job. I was literally so surprised I did. So it was a shocking revelation that I did. So
where'd you start? So, I mean, what was your first job?
I was in sales in a local distribution company, and I'm the most incapable person from a mechanical standpoint compared to the rest of the world. I have people who love equipment, don't care that much. I mean, I like cool cars, like equipment. I understand its functionality, but so I ended up being a sales rep for a company that distributed small engine parts, engines, chainsaw chain. I'd never used a chainsaw in my life. Long story short, a year after I was there as a 22-year-old, they started calling me, it was the oddest thing. They started calling me the captain because I could sell everything and anything. I would raid other people's territories, and I ended up second in the country in sales and chainsaw chain, literally memorizing the table that I wrote because I didn't even have Excel at the time, memorized a handwritten table of what it would do. I would go in these little shops all over Kansas and Oklahoma, some of Missouri, so I would go in and tell people how to use a chainsaw chain. I would sell things, anything they couldn't sell, they gave me and threw it into my van, and I drove off with things that had been there for 5 years. Like, go sell this. So I would go sell that. But I looked at everything as a total competition. I would scope out a small town, have a strategy. If you don't buy from me, I will go down the street here. Wow. It gave me a lot of confidence with a lot of grown men that I could instantly be a player. And I found an outlet, for competition, for honing my skills. It was just a different field now.
So what was your faith like at that moment, at that time?
I think I've said this on this, program before. I wasn't raised as a Christian. So I had been a Christian at that point, maybe, starting when I was, 14 and, and not very well trained, mind you. So I had a strong faith. In fact, my next job, I prayed to God. I knew that it was time to leave. I was starting a family and I didn't want to travel. And I said, God, release me to my father. I had in my mind my dad and his business and Paul Constant that owned a landscape company. Paul Constant, out of the blue, called me up. He was like my spiritual father and offered me a job.
Oh, neat.
So I have one sidebar here before we get farther into this discussion. If you don't close your blinds, everybody's going to think you're a zebra.
Yeah, you're matching your flag.
I was looking at him going, he looks like he's striped.
He was matching his flag.
Exactly.
So how is everybody out there? Say
there
hello.
we go. You were zebraing it on me. I was looking. I kept thinking there's something wrong with this picture.
Yeah.
Thank God for the sun right now.
There we go. Exactly.
It wasn't sunny earlier. Hello.
So my question, getting back to my original question,
yes.
Could you, as an 18-year-old, have even imagined yourself as an entrepreneur running a multifaceted company, any of that? In other words, was the sales job sort of the peak of your expectation for yourself? I mean, what was your sense of yourself as an 18, 19, 20-year-old?
It was odd. I did not have any sense of myself except as an athlete. And I still think of myself as a linebacker from football in business.
Interesting.
Hey, that's not bad. That's a good.
No, but I think that's interesting and helpful for people to understand, because I think one of the things we all deal with in life is that there's these unexpected twists and turns. It's like we're all taught that if we plan everything out, A plus B plus C always equals D, and this is how life was going to go. I mean,
some of us were like that.
Well, some of us were like, but I mean, a lot of us that grew up in homes where we had dads that worked. I mean, they went into an employment situation right out of college at 21, and 50 years later, they got their gold watch working at the same company. I mean, life was sort of, the business world, the way people thought it was just this long-term thing. You planned everything out. And of course, my parents' generation was all about retirement, right? You save everything up so that, you hit 63 or 65 and it's the house in Florida, Arizona, California, going to Lawrence Welk Village, play golf. I mean, it was all right.
Right.
And then our generation came along and it's just been like a weed. Like, we're all over the place.
And then our generation. Ooh.
Well, you guys are a few years behind me, but I'm just curious because life, at least in our two generations, has not really been this sort of planned out. Well, our expectations and the end result are pretty far away from each other.
Yeah.
Well, and you have to know your purpose. Like, your purpose comes in there sometime, and it's usually your purpose kind of shows up in part of your personality. He's saying he sees himself as a linebacker salesperson, so that's his purpose. He's supposed to go and tackle those things, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's more of a personality trait than a purpose, but it could be a purpose. But I mean, I think more what I hear you saying is you discovered a little bit about how you're wired, how you're going to approach every problem. Every problem is Dick Butkus and Ray Nitschke. There's somebody coming through the line, and I am going to take them out. And so you have a personality that I would say attacks problems. Some people, avoid them. Others procrastinate, right? Some are utterly like deer in headlights. They just go into panic mode. Your instinct is, I'm going to attack, solve this, and win.
Yeah. And
did you have a scripture that you held on to? Is there a scripture that you always went to give you that motivation, or?
Well, no, what's interesting is I was talking at this club I belong to last night. 2 young black guys came in, 2 entrepreneurs. Interesting dynamic that out of this CEO Hunters Club with over 100 people, there's one guy, great guy, who joined, and the only black guy in this. And he brought a friend. So, I could tell they wanted to talk. So they ended up asking me, one of the things they asked me is, so what was like, kind of, how did you get in your head? Like, what was like your motivation or your goal or your vision for your business? And I said, well, I'm a communication major. I had the easiest possible degree because I wanted to play football. And, go figure, I know how to talk and read and write already. Should have had a business degree or marketing or something. What I said, interestingly enough, that when I started contemplating a business, what I decided to do was that I wanted a template that was done like God created the world. And I said, the fact that there's such a thing as an atheist in the world, and yet from my viewpoint, the world is a divine, masterpiece with God's handiwork and fingerprints, DNA, obviously all over it. And I wanted there to be a way to do a business in such a way that I was immersed behind the scenes, and yet my influence and imprint were on everything. Now, how that worked out strategically, not even knowing that it would, was that I had this process where I delegated. I would hire other people. And one of the greatest compliments I had in the first 10 years, I hired a friend. He came in and he said, what's wild is I see your fingerprints and your influence everywhere, and yet you're completely submerged behind the scenes so much of the time. I said, that's what I was shooting for.
Yeah.
So, and so it wasn't necessarily so much of scripture as trying to have a context with my very limited business acumen. And I think that the lesson in that isn't what that was for me. It's that when you're really reaching out for God for an answer or for direction, that he will give it to you. And sometimes the thing he gives you that you will follow that doesn't make a lot of sense, the context he might give you, or the scripture or the direction, that often there's ramifications that you can't even anticipate, that if you do it the way he tells you, even though you don't understand the why, will result in, something being fabulous. I had that happen today in a meeting, just because I followed what I thought God was telling me in the meeting, that I was supposed to, I was going to come in and guide most of the meeting. Instead, I delegated out to everybody else. And they were like, this is one of the best meetings we've ever had. Even though I wasn't convinced the result would be the same, the result was way better. Why? Because I was reasoning around, I want these managers that I'm having share, they're going to own this more if they share their own ideas. If I don't adopt their own ideas into my own, my own language. And so that, I think, is a good lesson anywhere we're at in life, is that, obeying God and obeying those promptings we have. If you're really asking God for wisdom, and asking God for bread, he will not give you a snake. Won't give you, something other than that. If you really are sincere, you're asking in faith, and you're really willing to listen and do what he says to do, right, with no agenda.
So have you seen any conflict with that? I mean, has your faith been in any conflict of you doing any business at all?
Well, I think there's always ethical conflicts, in any business. There are things that you can look at as utilitarian or practical, and yet everything has an ethical implication to it. It would be disingenuous to say that that's not the way the real world works. For instance, we were talking about scheduling today. And so when we're scheduling, we schedule for efficiency in there. But the reality is that when you're scheduling work like in a landscaping company and it's raining outside, you're going to tend to pick, based on business risk, you're going to tend to circle the wagons around your biggest customers, your most demanding customers. You're not going to let this big customer fail. 10,000 one may take a back seat. So do I have all the answers to that? No. But I mean, I'm aware of the dynamic of there's an ethic. You want to treat everyone equally, and yet it's a profit-driven business. And the reality is that you might have a Wendy's and an Oak Park Mall that are equal needs, and you may have limited resources. Then what do? And you try to take care of people and you try to learn, but that's just the way it is. You gotta work those conflicts out. And especially between people. So, I mean, it's in those relationships. Even I've used the scripture, even though I haven't used, the Matthew 18 model of solving conflict. I've used that twice this week. Then I've seen people call each other out in big groups, didn't say this is the, biblical way to deal with conflict, said, don't call somebody out unless you want to be called out and, in front of others. Go to them, at first alone and have that conversation. And then if you need to bring myself or someone else in, we'll escalate from there. So there's so much to apply. And I think the other big conflict I had is I thought for a long time, Bob could address this some, and you guys would understand this, that there was this disconnect. I thought there's the spirit world and the natural world, and not really realizing that the two are actually one. They're actually merged. That this idea of the Greek separation of, estates, if you will, really isn't biblical. I mean, this is God's world. He created it. He loves commerce. He loves order. He loves government. I mean, He's the one who created all these things. These are not man-made institutions that God just left us to ourselves. These are things that he, in terms of, having dominion on the earth, these are all things that he wants us to deploy, and that people are called into these roles from great. And there's no role that's greater than another. You could be called to be the, person who is doing the most menial job in the eyes of the world, or you could be in charge of the entire country. And yet what are you called to do, and how do you walk that out?
That's right.
A question, just to back up a little bit. I'm intrigued by your delegation. And the reason I'm intrigued is that historically, in my interaction with people that are wired like you, they sort of got the Alexander the Great mentality, and they're power driven. It's about power. And they usually have this sense that I need to be out in front. I need, you know what I mean? I'm the right. And even though you have incredible power, like you are a power guy, the fact that you're a delegator is almost counterintuitive. So when you said that, the first thing that went through my brain is, how did that happen? Because that's not normal. That's not normally how you see people with your personality interact. So was there something that happened?
That's a great question. Wow, that's really a really compelling question. So yes, when I first got into my own business, it was, and I actually won a leadership award in our industry, and I gave a speech, and I can never remember the 5 V's. I didn't even know I had to give the speech. I came up with this speech literally like a half hour. The 5 V's: voice, volition, vote. Now I can only remember 3, but what happened is, when I first started the business, it was like I was feeling my strength, and I would touch all kinds of things. Now, I always was good at delegating. I quickly learned I needed others, but as a leader, I would always I was more the chief, and there were more chieftains, that were more Indians, some combination of them. And I got to a point of exhaustion, because at one point I had 3 different businesses, a church, a school, 5 kids, very involved in the kids' sports. And I was managing all of that, and I had managers, but I really didn't have the right people, and I also didn't have the right perspective. Then I went through, and I was voted the most likely to succeed in high school. I had this, feeling about myself that there's nothing I couldn't do. I had a sense of destiny that developed, and anything I put my hand to, any vision I could see in my head, I turned it into a reality. Then I went through a divorce. And what was interesting about that, is painful as that all is for anybody, especially when you've got children and family and friends and all of the, separation and stuff, was that I felt for the first time literally free because I was actually failed publicly, and everybody knew it. The greatest thing. I'm like, I was sitting on my deck, and I suddenly was like, and I'd also developed this mentality that I was like God's warrior. And I still believe that, but I mean, I forgot that I was a child. I was a son. I was free to be weak. I wouldn't share my weakness. So a guy who's worked with me, who's my brother-in-law, Todd Stone, said, "You changed so dramatically as a leader. We didn't know you. You were an enigma to us. You were out here." And then I'm like, I suddenly was comfortable to be weak. I don't know what to do. You go figure that out. Not my deal. And then I developed a different leadership style based on the fact I could be vulnerable, weak. And then you know what happened is I did that, and I allowed others to really own areas. I got way better people, because the best people out there don't want to be babied and micromanaged.
Right.
So when people come to work, like, well, especially higher level managers, what time is my work? What are the hours? Go, why are you asking me? I don't know. What's your workload? If you got to go to a soccer game in the middle of the day, go get your stuff done. I don't know if you're going to be working at night. Not my problem. Next question. What are my job? Here's your role. Here's your responsibilities. Go make it happen. what do you guys want to do? What's the right thing to do? Let people lead, let them develop, let them put their DNA and their vision, their voice, their volition, their will, their vote into the process. Let them own it. And it's way lighter load for me, and the load's distributed. They're all happier, So that's where we came up with our values of team ownership, greatness, and growth. We work together as a team. We want everybody to have ownership of their own areas and their own jobs and their roles. We are focused on greatness. We want to be great, and we want to grow, not just revenue, but grow as individuals, grow as a company, grow, people, and let them take the next step. So I said today in our meeting, I said, because now we have multiple divisions and hundreds of people, and there's always competition. Like they're taking my guys and from here, and they want to take them. And I said, look, here's what we're going to do always. We're going to do what is best for the individual. That's not a request. That is what we're going to do. If there's somebody on your team that you have groomed who could go to another division and be more successful, I want you to value that person above the fact that you develop them, above the fact you will get another person. Do the right thing, and we will get the best people in here. Do not be protective and hold somebody back in their career. Share people, have this team ethic.
That's because that's not the way it works in the corporate world.
Yeah, I'm not very corporate.
Definitely no. That's great. So how big is your company?
Well, when it snows, we have 500 plus people out.
Oh, wow.
We have, lots of employees and seasonal employees and part-time employees and subcontractors.
Well, it's interesting, this subject of failure. And the reason I bring it up is that one of the ironies of success is that it's a prison in some ways. And failure is a breakout.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many times with the high profile people that I've worked with over the years, after they've had some sort of public moral failure, a divorce, sometimes some sort of a business failure, some sort of a massive failure where everybody sees it, who have all said to me, sitting in my office or in my house, I've never felt so free in my life. And the first time I heard it, it was sort of a head twister for me. It just didn't compute. You know what I mean? Because it's like, you have these expectations or these assumptions about how things should be. And here's somebody that just failed and feels free. And I had never equated the two things together, failure and freedom.
Yeah.
Well, it's free from responsibility of leading sometimes.
Well, I think
I'm just saying that on my
other
personal
people's expectations.
experience.
In other words, whether you're in the religious world or, whether you're in other, where there's this sort of, unfortunately, people don't really know us. So they view us through our image, and we have this image, and we talk about that all the time about how we have this image to maintain. I mean, my God, we're living in the narcissistic world of Instagram and everything, everybody's got this image, right?
Right.
And then suddenly your image gets
your brand. They call it your brand. You have to brand yourself.
Your brand, right?
Yeah.
And so what people don't realize that I have had I don't even know, I want to say privilege. In some ways it's a privilege only because people have shared their life with me, but I've had the privilege of seeing what a prison that actually is.
Right.
It is.
I was so just to give you an example, I was so miserable in a bad partnership. I felt like the school and the church and the business were all connected with this. I just did everything wrong that I started when I knew nothing, and I built so fast. And then I built this, like a house where like a hallway here, you can't quite fit through. This room's over here. It's not really big enough. That was nothing really. It all functioned kind of on their own, but the connectivity made it so that I basically said that. I just said that I said to myself, I would say even to, some of my closest friends that I was like, an imprisoned king in my own kingdom. So what I did is I actually, oddly enough, back when backgammon first started and my mom and dad played backgammon, is I started playing backgammon online. And then in the rooms, these people from all over the world would chat. The only time of the day that I got to be myself in what was a toxic marriage, toxic partnership, and kind of a broken world were these total strangers that we just would like chat. It's like, I didn't know them. You never couldn't see each other. You just sat there and chat, played backgammon. And then I'm like, they were like, you're really funny. You're really engaging. Because when you're paying a lot of people, and then when you're closed off and you're insecure and you think that your success is based on having this bulletproof persona, which really, when hindsight, no one really believes that. The people who are closest to you, even they're like, yeah, that might have been your view of yourself, but that's not, you may have that out to the people on the, second and third and fourth tier, but the people who are working with you, like, yeah, we know you have problems, you have failures,
Right.
But it's your own awareness of those and your own willingness to be humble and really, to say that, I came up with really a saying to myself that, people would say, you're a self-made man. I go, no, I'm a God-made man. I mean, outside of God's wisdom and deliverance and care, any one of us are Job, who go from, a picture of success and perfection at almost every level to literally, can be devastated. And look what drove Job. He was afraid. He lived in a constant state of fear and sacrificing. And when he finally saw God, he didn't even ask why God did what he did. He didn't ask for the backstory. He just said, I saw you and that's enough. So when I went through the divorce, I felt so free that I was like living in the instant. I mean, I went into a Sunday school class. I had been hiding in my church. I'd been so involved in starting a church and exhausted. Like, I don't want them to know who I am, what I can do. They're going to want to tap into me. And we were married and I was like, I was just exhausted, and felt like, it's like, yeah, it's true. 20% of the people let's do 80% of the work. I just don't want to be one of those. So I wasn't doing anything. And, I go into this thing, right after my divorce, this class, and I was told to go to Sunday school class. I knew, and I couldn't get away from it. I'm church. I'd never gone to a Sunday school class there ever. And then to come to find out, they were all canceled except for one class. And that was to redo the strategy for all the missions of the church. And I walked, so I walk into this deal and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's like 30 people in there. None of them know me. I've been there like in the pew leaving, not, and these guys, and I don't say a word. I'm like, I'm just here. I'm going to sit. And then my mind works in blueprints. I can get a blueprint that's a total download. I start getting all these blueprints like, oh, I'm going to have to say something because it's not, and I know it's not. So I know you don't know who I am. I'm not involved in missions. I'm not even a member of the church here. I've been here 7 years. But here's what I think. And I start bam, 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 bam. When I was done, the missions guy came up to me and he just looked at me and he goes, who are you? And I said, well, I'm a completely broken man. I said, I came here because I was told to, and I will never come back, and I'm not going to be involved in anything. And I walked out.
Wow.
But I was living in the realm, and I wasn't even it sounds kind of proud, like, oh, I was just like, I'm like, all I am is a donkey that's talking right now. My life's a mess. I'm broken. I'll be a vehicle here to do whatever I'm supposed to do because I'm God's vessel and I'm going to do it. I went down to a homeless shelter. I hung out. Like, I went down to City Union Mission, sat there with homeless guys. I just sat there with them.
Wow.
Like, I want to identify with the broken people of the world.
Wow.
I just want to empathize with them. My life's a mess. And I'm going to be with people who are a mess. I'm not going to pretend. And if I was told to do it, I would do it. I would go show up over here, show up over there. And that was one of the most great times. In fact, my ex-wife thought it was an act, like I was trying to act like I was all spiritual. It's like, oh, no. I know our marriage is over. I am just like for the first time free and right with God. And it was a freeing moment that,
wow.
That I wish we could all somehow keep our head poked above the clouds of this world to breathe heavenly air and live there constantly. And I think that's possible. We're usually bouncing up and down, and sometimes we're down here for months. And then we realize when we get a little reprieve and we're like, oh, there you are, God. And here's what life's about. And here's the possibilities of really living this divine life. I was reading in Hebrews this morning where he talks about that. It's such a great scripture in Hebrews 11. And again, I was reading some Facebook group I'm in, with these guys, and he's like, oh, I'm just reading Hebrews. And he said something that made me want to think about it. I mean, or wanted to look it up because I had a question theologically, but what it said, if I can find it in Hebrews 11, you guys can bear with me a minute.
Yeah, no problem.
It says, well, it says in actually 12:1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of God. So again, it's just that it's like you can lay these things aside.
And that was Hebrews what? Let me write that in the comments.
Hebrews 12:1 and 2.
Okay.
So it just reminded me like, there's so many cares we all bear, and there's so many things that want to entangle us, including anxiety and worry and and stress and strife. And I'm not saying you don't work out your problems by faith, but there's this point where you have to really be resting in God and believing that, he's going to give you the grace and the answers, and that you just don't really hold it all together like you think. And you really can let him move and do things. And if you will get out of the way, a lot of times way more will happen than if you're in the way, stressing about everything and trying to, helicopter over every situation, being a helicopter manager, helicopter mom,
So is that the go-to Hebrew, like that? Is there a go-to that you have? So you don't have that stress. I mean, we all get stressed, right? So what is it that you do? What is your practice of when you have that kind of stress? And
I totally have that stress all the time. That's not right. My point is, I randomly came across that looking for something else. And I think that's what God does for us a lot of times. We go in looking for this and we come out with a loaf of bread.
Right.
But, it would be disingenuous of me to say I have I don't really have, the only verse I have that, or the analogy, I've got a lot of them that I could share, but I kind of believe that that's situational. That I've told people recently that, that somebody was talking about prayer and why God doesn't answer. And it's like, well, prayer is about ultimately, in being in a relationship with God is ultimately about not getting the answer, not getting the result. It's about that relationship deepening. And a lot of times when we think our prayers aren't answered or that we're being ignored, that's when the real work is done. Are you going to stand and believe God no matter what?
Right.
Are you going to be like
praying is more like, just discussing it. I know a lot of times when I ask for something, it's not like a gift giving thing, right? It's more like a conversation that, like, hey God, I'm dealing with this. If you could do that would be great, but I know it's in your will.
I think for me, what I'm particularly tuning in on is this interesting dynamic of failure. Because on the surface, you're looking at it going, well, that's a bad thing to fail. Everything in our culture, reinforces the fact that failure is bad. And yet you're telling a story about the benefits of failure, which brings us back to the Joseph journey, where you have this young man who has this sense of destiny on his life. He's sort of the prize son in a large family, and life is good. He's kind of his dad's favorite, who then goes through a series of things where he fails.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And it goes backwards. Like he just keeps, and then he seems to get ahead, and then he looks like he fails again. Right. And what's interesting about that is he goes from what he thinks he's actually a big fish in a really little pond, right? Because he's a big deal in a family of 12 with a bunch of sheep herders in a little remote place in the Middle East, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then through the series of events, he ends up being taken to the most influential empire in the known world at the time. And the reason I bring this up is because what failure did was actually shift his whole perspective.
Right.
That's what I'm hearing you talk about. Is what happened is you went through this thing where you by everybody's standards, you failed miserably. And yet the things that happened in your life in terms of shifting your worldview, your perspective, your way of looking at was dramatic.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it literally changed the rest of your life.
It did.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, like Joseph, I mean, I went through some scary, crazy moments of near bankruptcy, IRS audit, another bad partnership. And somehow, I somehow came out of that in a way better position than I had before. And, I won't go into all details, but I was just stunned. And then what that does is it tells you your success doesn't make you go, well, God, I knew I was always this. You're like, God did this. I mean, so then it makes you even more aware of your purpose, because now when I'm succeeding, I know that, yes, I'm engaged and I'm in a partnership like we all are with God in life, and that I'm a part of that. It's not like God just does all the work and I'm just here as a beneficiary. I have certain gifts and skills that I'm to deploy and be a certain thing and be in a relationship with him and others. But at the end of the day, if God breathes on things to succeed or not, you either shrivel up or you succeed. And so it's really important when you see people in failure. I try to be careful to not judge people who seem to be failing, and that it's all about sometimes it's always our own decisions, but often there are things that are happening that, yes, of course it's decisions, but there's things happening that are a bridge to something amazing, even if that something amazing is internal. And maybe they don't have a restoration of fortunes. Maybe they do. Maybe it looks different. That's the beauty of it. Every life is a totally different canvas, and you're not the painter. You're there to witness it. You may get to participate and help people understand the painting that they are, or the potential that they have to become, but you're not the one doing the, doing the actual.
One of the stories I remember was, wasn't it Michael Jordan who got cut from his high school basketball team? But it changed his life.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, it literally changed his life. That failure had such a dramatic impact on him that it changed everything. So it's interesting about failure, and the thing about it is perspective. I guess what failure does is it shifts our perspective. This is going to really date me, but when I was a kid, I was 11, I saw a movie that had the most profound impact on me, and it was called The Shoes of a Fisherman. Or The Shoes of the Fisherman. I don't know if you've ever seen this movie, but it's Anthony Quinn, who I actually have Anthony Quinn's clarinet sitting about 10 feet from me.
Oh.
That his mom played at Azusa Street or at Angelus Temple, but it's a long story. But anyways, he plays the Pope. And what he does is that he's almost the Pope. I can't remember the story, but he sneaks out of the Vatican and tours Rome at night as a simple priest. Nobody knows he's the Pope.
That's neat.
He has the most incredible shift in perspectives, right? Because he's been living in a bubble.
Right.
Yeah.
And, and he ends up, and the things he has to deal with in terms of broken humanity. I think there's even something happens with a woman, and he's like all these, right? And it's like all these things that he's been isolated and insulated from. Suddenly he's dealing with what real people got to deal with, you know?
Right.
And I've always, I need to find it and see if they've got that movie on Netflix or something somewhere, because I've always wanted to go back and rewatch it now as an adult.
That sounds
But
neat.
as an 11-year-old, it was really eye-opening for me about how a shift of perspectives can so impact your life.
Yeah.
Well, to me, failure, when you fail at something, I always feel like, well, then the next time I'm going to succeed. But I know when I'm not walking in what God's wanting me to do at the time, because it feels harder. Like it's like, oh, this is like really hard. You know, I don't know. There is a feeling to it, right? Like if you're toiling too much, you're toiling the soil too much. It's kind of like, are you on the right path with God? You know, is God having you struggle?
We don't always know, because I think what Mike was saying is there's
Right.
sometimes that failure is on us. I mean,
Right.
we made bad choices.
Right.
We were unwise. But
Right. And
the
that's what
ones where God's orchestrating it, the only way we even realize that's happening is in hindsight. There's no way in the moment you can know what's really going on.
Not always.
You know?
There is a feeling that something's off, but you don't exactly know what.
Well, I've had there's situations that have happened that that, you know, and Mike knows that. I mean, where they were so bizarre. It's like there was no rational reason why certain things should have happened. And then you're suddenly like getting taken out, or something's happening to you, and you're just like, what? Like, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
And I think those situations are ones where you can go back later and go, okay, but always what always happens, and every single time, it just doesn't, there's a shift that goes on. You get moved, like God is repositioning you, because when you get repositioned, you often look at the same thing from a completely different perspective. I was thinking about what it really was touching me, what you're talking about the poor. Like, you get broken, right? It's you know, you're like the Pope, you're like this big shot, and suddenly, you know what I mean? You go through this thing, and now you're out there and you're just with the broken.
Right.
Like, you're one of them now, right? You don't suddenly see them as, oh, those poor people.
Right.
You go, I am a poor people.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's a shift.
It's hard. It's hard. It's not an easy place to be.
It's profound what it does to you.
It makes you, it humbles you. That's for sure. It humbles you.
But I would venture to say, and you can address this, but the lessons learned, the shift in perspectives from going through those failures are probably values that are instilled in your company. Like, in other words, you went through some sort of a transition, and the lessons that you learned and the values that you adopted or came into light are very mission critical to your life at this point.
Yeah, they are. They're mission critical to how you lead and manage, and how you deal with others, and how you have hope for others. That you know, if you don't have a sense of your own failure, which is really not anyone who's just succeeding, it's actually, I think, just fundamental blindness and or dishonesty. And I also think, if you're really honest, like even with, things that I would say that I, have turned a corner in the last, decade, that maybe the prior decade, I was like, in a firefight, it seemed like, for a lot of times. Is that when you're, I literally thought the other day, I thought, I'm going to someday look in heaven, and it's kind of it's not a morbid thought, but it's just an honest thought that, I wonder, had I been able to live, and not be caught in sin or distraction or anxiety, things that, the wrong direction, living, doing things from pride or working from that, what I could have been, what I could have accomplished, like, you know. And so there's always that sense that there's, you know, that you're in a race, like Paul said, to lay aside encumbrances, things that are in your way, fight, I batter my body in such a way to, you know, to win the prize. I mean, viewed as a prize fight. And I think that's, you know, life is so beautiful, and yet it's an all-out total war. And it's both. It's art, it's, you know, and it's a battle to live. And it's also fair for us to remember that there are, you know, I mean, very clearly in every story, including ours, there are dark forces that align against us, you know, that want to thwart our purpose. So I know that there's some who might talk about those once in a while, you know, and I'm one of them.
Yeah,
So I'm going to give you an opportunity to earn some brownie points. So one of the interesting dynamics in this transition of your life is you got remarried to wonderful Tina. What she brought to your life. In other words, she's part of your journey.
Yeah.
How would you say, given what you've been through this transition, how has that shifted your relationship with your wife, with a significant other in your life?
What's the question? How has that shifted?
Yeah, in other words, this failure, everything that you've gone through, you've already, you know, some of us have been through the same journey. We didn't make it through the first one very, very good. Now you're on you get a do-over. So what lessons through this broken, failed journey
what could you share
say you're using in this round two, this redo?
How is it that you found this wonderful, beautiful lined up person? How are you lining that up?
Now you guys are asking me multiple questions. Let me answer the first one.
Write them down.
The first one is that there was something that I never really had in my first marriage. And, you know, I'm not throwing under the bus. I had, you know, every bit to do with the failure of it, but I never felt like this total love, acceptance, loyalty, and commitment. And Tina brings so much to my life that literally even my recent, I mean, I've turned corners since I've been married because of even the stability of not just being a highly organized person and very focused, but a person who has somebody at the foundation that's with me, that is there with me. And and she adds a lot in. She's, you know, very focused, very caring. I see how she deals with others, very generous to other people with her time and her life, and including me. But it's that, you know, it's who she is, you know, in combination with me that like has doubled my ability to do what I do out in the world. It's chemistry. It's not there's things that can be quantified, and then there's other things that are harder to quantify. And, you know, and I think that you get to quantify more and more of those as you live life together and you get hindsight, because hindsight is, you know, is valuable in that. But that dynamic, when we really were committed, you know, engaged, married, things really ramped up. I mean,
so you would say you have actually got a partner?
Yeah, let's say I have a partner.
Yeah.
And I think that people were, you know, I hate saying this because, you know, it's so hard. You meet people who are struggling and alone, and everybody wants that. And I feel very blessed to have that, you know, but that is the truth. I mean, for me, and I can't, you know, speak for everybody, and every relationship's different, but that dynamic of having her in my life it has a spillover effect on everything else.
Right. If you feel secure in that area, you can tend to do better in all of the other areas of your life. If you're not having to, you know, somebody's got your back, they've got you, they're there for you, and they have a vision, you know, like yours. You know, that's
I
that's
can
important.
speak from a male point of view. There's nothing more powerful than having a woman that's got your back. Like when you got a woman that loves you and believes in you, you know what I mean? That's in it, like who's looking at you as how can I help you be? I mean, sheesh, that, any man would just, you go to the wall, as we say, right? You'd go to the wall for that, so yeah.
Right. Well, that comes down to choices again, who you're choosing.
Yeah.
To be in your life.
That's wonderful. Great story. God is so redemptive, isn't he?
Very. Yeah. I mean, it's so amazing when you look at that aspect of who he is, the real mercy and the kindness of God and it should change you, right? It should cause you to have a softening toward everyone around you, a sense of joy, a sense of purpose, and a sense of calm and peace that, that it doesn't all depend on your effort or your smarts. And even if you want all of that, it's like you can relax in God. God knows what you want. He knows what you need. Doesn't mean you're going to get what you ask for or think you need.
It's not a list.
In your timing, but he, here comes Tina.
Uh-oh.
Oh, there she is. Aw. Hey.
Yeah.
So do any of your kids work with you?
Well, my daughter does marketing for us. My son does a fireworks stand up there that basically I started and he took over. At this point, not really. No, they do their own thing. And, which I'm glad that they, I think some of that, quite frankly, would have been different from the divorce standpoint. I think there was some things that happened that caused kids to kind of spin out and have to find their own world. And yet what's interesting is some of that sense of family and their destiny is coming back in. Haley stood up at our wedding and said about Tina and I getting married, and their mom's married and we have a good relationship, but said, this is so healing for our family. Just about Tina and I. Yeah. And she said that. And so, I think there's a possibility of that, but I also never put that on my children. I mean, some people are like, what's your plan for this? What's that? It's like, hey, if everything I have done is handed off to somebody else, fine. If it, goes to my children, fine. If I sell it, fine. Because I don't look at it as something like, this is going to be around for 1,000 years.
Right. You're not looking at it as a legacy. Right.
I mean, yeah, I hope it's there, but I'm going to be dead and gone. It's not a legacy that its only value is to me is if God has a value for others to have it. And if that's in the cards, then great. If not, then great. It's not mine because everything I have is from God, through God, and to God. So, I don't know what he'll want to do really finally.
Right. Right. Great.
And having no agenda is a good place to be. It's like, it doesn't mean I have no plan. Doesn't mean I don't plan for the future or explore options, but I don't try to manhandle or force those things in. And a lot of entrepreneurs do, like, it's time for you to step up now. You're 32. You've been out on your own, time to come into the deal. And like, I'm not even sure that I really want that I want them,
Do you suggest any authors that inspire you in business? Do you follow anybody?
I like Cameron Herold, some of his stuff. Talks about writing a vivid vision. And I think this is a great practice for your life. A vivid vision is a leaning forward 3 years into looking at what your organization looks like at every aspect. It shouldn't be more than 4 pages. Is something that you would put out to the world. It isn't giving away your secret sauce, but it's addressing what you look like, and it's to your team, because instead of just having a mission statement or just having a business plan, you're giving them a written vision that can be read and understood with flowing language. Some people put it to music. Some people include, art or cartoons. They take it to the next level to put visualization with the words.
Neat.
And I think you can do that in your own life to go, where do I really want to be?
Right.
And the point is that 3 years, like 1 year isn't a lot of time. More than 3 years, it's kind of hard to know. But when you look out 3 years, you can have a pretty good idea, make plans. There's enough growth to happen. So that's a good book. And I love this book called Good to Great because it gives a very, almost a scientific view. And one also written by the same author, I can't remember who it is. It's a very prominent guy, but is Level 5 Leadership.
Level 5 Leadership.
Yeah.
That sounds familiar to me. It sounds familiar to me, but it's not a John Maxwell, right?
So. Well, like Level 4 leaders are widely known. They're hard driving. They're going to succeed. It's about them. I mean, I'd say a Donald Trump, a person who is a hard driver. Level 5 leaders are people who, when you ask them how they succeed, I was very lucky. I was very fortunate. I was blessed. I was surrounded by great people. They're always deferring to others. They have a sense of the wholeness of life and it doesn't mean that they have no skills and that they have no confidence. They just see themselves as a part of a relay race, as a part of a cog, and not as the end all and be all for every single thing. And I tell people all the time, I told these guys last night, said, get used to this. You have one, if you're an amazing person, you have 3 incredible things you bring to the world. Usually you're going to have one, maybe a second, and then you have some things you're pretty good at, but other people are as good or better and way more passionate. And then you fall off the cliff. And these things, it takes an act of your will to do. Find who you are, leverage those things, be humble enough and smart enough to work with other people who complement you, and don't try to work on your weaknesses to the point that because you're not going to be good at everything. You're good at some things. Like I'm great at starting things. I'm a great pioneer. I understand enough about how to rule, to set up systems, things, but I don't want to manage them all. I'm not the best mayor. There's other people that are way better. They exceed me. They love it. They live it. And I'm so grateful for them. And they completely thrash me and dominate, And when I let
you're the visionary, they're the implementer.
And and if I don't have those people, I'm not, it's like I'm killing myself to be them, and I'm very small.
Right. And know when to delegate, right? Know when to delegate, know when to call your expert, right? Know when to call on each one of those.
And so what's funny is delegation, I tell people a couple things about it, but the heart of delegation is do the things that you and only you can do. That's what I tell people. What do you and only you can do? There's a real estate principle. Real estate is find real estate's highest and best use. Find that. What is your highest and best use in the world? What do you and you only do? That's where you need to focus your energies, and then ride the wave. I like to say, if you get buried by the wave, you're dead in the water. You got to find a way as an entrepreneur, if that's what you do, and even in life, to be on the surfboard and above it. If the wave gets under you, that means you got to rise with it. And that means you got to have other people who are all rising with you on their own surfboards, where you all crash together.
That's good. And so, Bob, do you have anything?
Well, it's getting late, and I want to respect people's time. But
I just looked at the time.
Mike, I'm really grateful you came on tonight. Secondly, I'm really grateful to God for some reason, at least in my spirit, I feel like this is one of the more meaty, substantive, helpful shows we've ever done. I think there's a lot, if people go back and watch this, I think there's a ton of stuff that they can glean from this. So thank you so much for sharing your story, your journey. Thank you for your honesty, your transparency.
Yes.
Being vulnerable is not necessarily a natural thing for guys that like to win. So you've exhibited to me some incredible character. So thank you.
Yes,
well, thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you for your authenticity, most definitely. And I love your story anyway. So it's great to know you. And Bob, Bob, are you still a mentor to Michael?
No, actually, as I've used this analogy in the past about good marriages are like bicycle pedals. I think our friendship is a lot like that, meaning that we are mentee and mentor to each other. It just depends on the moment and the situation. Yep. Mike is probably giving me some of the best advice in my life. And help me in my seasons of confusion and where I've lost my bearings, and it's like I'm in the fog here, brother. I need a light. I need that. I'm looking for that. That lighthouse.
And I can say the exact same thing.
Oh, nice.
And lots of times, there's been times Bob came in and I saw this about 6 months ago. I just was waiting to tell you, and now's the right time. And I'm like, wow. Sometimes delivering a very timely message.
That's why you surround yourself with those people. You find that power of the 5, those people that you need to tell you the truth, not your yes people, right? Sometimes you need the truth speakers in your life, the light speakers.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate you. And that was a great story. I'm going to go back and watch it myself.
And filled with nuggets of wisdom.
Lots of nuggets. I hope y'all wrote that all down. So, all right. I hope you come on again sometime, Mike. So
absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you guys, and have a wonderful, blessed week. And we will see you guys later.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Night,
bye. Thanks.
Join us Monday mornings at 8:45 a.m. and Thursdays 6:30 p.m.